Good evening, good morning, depending on where you are situated in the world. Happy Tuesday. Yeah, I hope everybody had a nice weekend, and I hope everyone's week is getting off to a fantastic start. Can't wait to get this going. There's a lot of boxing to catch up on, a lot of breaking news, just a lot to discuss in general. So yeah, I can't wait to get started. Some of the topics that we are going to go through today are some of the recent fight announcements, such as Joyce versus Joseph Parker, Joseph JoJo Diaz versus William Zepeda. Those are a couple new fight announcements. Brandon Jackson's in the house. Salute. What is going on? Thank you for coming through. Heck yeah. Always a pleasure. So yeah, the Joyce Parker fight announcement, JoJo Diaz versus William Zepeda fight announcement. We're going to recap some of the weekend's action as well. Virgil Ortiz Jr. versus Michael McKinson, obviously, as well as Blair Cobbs versus Maurice Hooker. Michael Conlan versus Miguel Marriaga. Bektimir Melikuziev looked pretty good this past weekend, as did Marlon Esparza, although I do think that Marlon Esparza versus Senicia Estrada 2 is probably unlikely now that Estrada has left Golden Boy Promotions. We're going to preview some of the weekend's action, namely Teofimo Lopez versus Pedro Campa, as well as Tevin Farmer taking on veteran, former lightweight champion Mickey Bay. That fight is actually taking place this Friday, so don't wait till Saturday to see what's going on with that one. It's happening on Friday. We're also going to talk a little bit about the idea that Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford is reportedly closer than ever. I still have to see it or read it to believe it. Tyson Fury is kind of teasing coming out of retirement to face Derek Chisora. I thought that one was a little interesting. Nothing against Derek Chisora. I just didn't expect Tyson Fury to come out so enthused to return to the ring so soon after he's declared his retirement, only to say that he wants to fight a trilogy fight, even though he won the first couple of fights. So this wouldn't be a rubber match. It would simply be a trilogy fight. He'd be going for his third win against Derek Chisora. And then Oscar De La Hoya gave some, what I saw to be some discouraging news on the likelihood of Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Tank Davis. And then Billy Joe Saunders, it looks like he has been unable to strike a deal with Eddie Hearn, which is going to likely lead to Billy Joe Saunders, if he does in fact continue his career, to fight elsewhere, but not with Matchroom and not on DAZN. Remember, Billy Joe Saunders fought most of his career with Frank Warren, and then went to Matchroom in 2019, I believe. And now he has been unable to strike a deal with Eddie Hearn, as he was kind of on the fence of retirement. Looks like he does plan to go to the ring, return to the ring, but at the right price. Eddie Hearn basically said he can't pay Billy Joe what Billy Joe wants to get paid. Also, Gary Russell Jr. kind of gave an update on his shoulder issue. It looks like he's still recovering from the injury, and it is in question on whether or not he ever returns to the ring, Gary Russell Jr. But also, one of the more surprising pieces of news just broke probably about 2-3 hours ago, and that is that they have finalized Conor Ben versus Chris Eubank Jr. They were teasing it, and it sounded like it was about to come together, and then it sounded like it started to fall apart a little bit. But no, it looks like it's official. They haven't, released the flyer yet, as far as I've seen, but it looks like they've got the date, and it looks like they have the venue. The date, I believe, was October 9th or thereabout, whatever weekend is around October 9th. And then the venue is the O2 Arena in London. So that's a very interesting matchup. And I see that fight as being a good thing and a bad thing, and we're going to get into why. But just to kind of give a little hint, it's a bad thing in terms of what it probably means to the career of Conor Ben. Not that he's just going to get busted up like Kell Brook did against Gennady Golovkin, but more so he's been on a very interesting trajectory at welterweight. And I just wanted to see him more or less penetrate the division. I wanted to see him kind of incrementally keep working up the steps. I wanted to see how good he could get. But he's going to get paid more in this fight against Chris Eubank Jr., given their dad's history as rivals, fought each other twice, and we're going to get into that as well. But it looks like he's going to get an outsized paycheck, just more money than most boxers will probably amass throughout their career. Conor Ben's about to get paid that, and I don't love what that probably means for his, 147-pound career. But props to him for securing the bag, as they say. But yeah, let's get right into first the fight announcements. I want to talk Joyce versus Joseph Parker just for a moment. First of all, I thought that it was interesting that they are listing this fight as Joyce versus Joseph Parker and not Joseph Parker versus Joyce. What's going on? Sonny Jack Napier in the house. Thank you for coming through. Heck yeah. Welcome. Yeah. And, Joseph Parker is the one who is the former WBO heavyweight champion. So I thought he was going to get, A-side billing against Joyce, who has had he's still undefeated. He's been having a very good, heavyweight career. He's beaten a couple good fighters now. And I was pretty much, expecting that if this fight was going to get made, that it was, in fact, going to be listed as Joseph Parker versus Joyce. But, Joseph Parker doesn't seem like he's like the hardball negotiator that a former heavyweight champion probably should be. He seems like a pretty easygoing guy who just wants meaningful fights. And if he is to pretty much like thwart the upward trajectory of Joyce, that would be another big feather in Joseph Parker's cap. Like, that would be a significant win. One of the best of his career. I would say at this point, his best win, I wouldn't say it's the Derek Chisora fights. I would say it's most likely his win over Andy Ruiz. He was the first to give Andy Ruiz a loss, and that was actually how he won the WBO title. So, yeah, they announced Joyce versus Joseph Parker. I haven't seen odds on the fight yet. I would assume, well, I don't know. Sometimes when you've got a name that's kind of buzzing like Joyce, they might get more money on their side to where they are made the slight favorite over, again, former heavyweight champion Joseph Parker. Yes, he only held one share of the belt, and you can argue that there is a difference between champion and title holder. But yeah, Joseph Parker, he is no slouch. And if I was to kind of guess, I'm going to do a preview as we near the fight day, but if I was going to guess today who's more likely to win between Joyce and Joseph Parker, I think I would shade on the side of Joseph Parker in that one. Also, Joseph JoJo Diaz is about to fight William Zepeda. I think they're making that fight for November, so that fight is now official. Two Golden Boy fighters. I'm kind of surprised that Oscar is putting his prospect up against somebody who I see to be as, I don't know, one of Oscar's 5 best fighters on Golden Boy. JoJo Diaz, he's probably right around that 5 spot behind, Virgil Ortiz Jr., Jaime Munguia, and maybe a couple of others. But in a sense, it also makes sense that Oscar is going to be matching his hot prospect William Zepeda up against JoJo Diaz, because it's kind of a win-win. If JoJo Diaz spoils the William Zepeda party, then that's just another significant indication that JoJo is still a top contender. And then if William Zepeda does in fact beat, the veteran who was very good at 126, he won a belt against Tevin Farmer at 130, and who's still a pretty viable fighter at 135. If Zepeda beats him, then that kind of catapults him to, top contender status. It just puts a lot of shine on his name. Thus far, he's been a very exciting fighter, but this would by far be his most significant win, almost to the point where I think this one is too dangerous. If you were to ask me today who's going to win between JoJo Diaz and William Zepeda, I would slightly favor JoJo Diaz. Way more proven. Even though he's not a true 135 guy, he's super durable. It's hard to envision JoJo Diaz getting stopped. So I would have to, and you know, in William Zepeda's last fight, he got hit a lot. And when he got hit, he was kind of getting rocked, you know, a significant amount. JoJo Diaz is a pretty damn good boxer. So right now, I would say I would slightly favor JoJo Diaz over William Zepeda. But, you know, let's get into some of recapping the weekend's action where, you know, the marquee fight was Virgil Ortiz Jr. against Michael McKinson. And, you know, this was not a step-up fight for Virgil Ortiz Jr. In fact, I would say his last two opponents are probably better than Michael McKinson, although it's hard to really gauge how good Maurice Hooker is. I'm assuming, I'm just going to go out and say, I think Maurice Hooker was a lot better less than 2 years ago when he fought Virgil Ortiz than he is today, you know, or last weekend, should I say, when he fought Blair Cobbs. But most people, you know, really believe that Virgil Ortiz Jr. was going to win against McKinson. I didn't see anybody but McKinson picking McKinson to win this fight, but it was still supposed to be interesting to see how Ortiz was going to match up against, you know, a slick southpaw, being that he hadn't fought a southpaw since he had become a relevant fighter. Basically, since he had fought, you know, the Samuel Vargases, we hadn't seen Ortiz against a southpaw. So, you know, in the first, you know, couple rounds, it was kind of interesting. McKinson gave him some interesting looks, but Virgil Ortiz Jr. started to do Virgil Ortiz Jr. like things. And you just saw him start to break McKinson down, most notably to the body, to where his body just couldn't take it anymore. Virgil Ortiz, I really do see to be one of the most destructive forces in boxing, pound for pound. Yes, he does get hit a bit. I mean, not a ton. He keeps like an active high guard, so he's moving around while keeping the high guard. But, you know, his most, it's hard to say that the jab is more impressive than his, you know, left hook to the body, but his jab is kind of what keeps the party going. It allows Ortiz to keep on advancing on his opponent, and it produces a ton of stress to where if the opponent is going to survive, they have to show a ton of lateral movement, and they have to take angles to even get clean punches off on Ortiz without getting hit in return. So Ortiz more or less did what we expected him to do. TJ's in the house. What's going on? Heck yeah, what it does. Yeah, good to hear from you. Yeah, and it's always a pleasure catching your commentary in the comments as well. Always super insightful. But yeah, we're just talking we're recapping some of the action, and I just spoke of just for a moment on the fight announcements between Joyce and Joseph Parker, and then JoJo Diaz versus William Zepeda. But Virgil Ortiz Jr. pretty much handled business, knocked McKinson out. Well, TKO'd McKinson. And again, it's a very short list of fighters in the welterweight division who you could even give a good shot at. Oh, thank you, TJ. Heck yeah! I hope those bets are going well. You know, it's funny. My bets are so hit and miss. Even when I think that it's like more or less a short shot, it feels like it's almost as likely not to hit as it is to hit. Yeah, JoJo versus Zepeda is a good fight, and I was saying that if I was to, you know, kind of pick somebody who I imagine is going to win the fight, if I had to pick today, I think I would shade towards JoJo Diaz beating William Zepeda. Just way more proven in the division. Plus, Zepeda got hit a lot in his last fight. But Virgil Ortiz Jr., I'm trying to think of who I would expect. Like, if he was to fight certain fighters at welterweight today, who would be more likely to beat Virgil Ortiz? Like, you would have to start at, you know, Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. But beyond that, I mean, maybe Stanionis. I think that would be a hell of a fight. But I just hope that Golden Boy is able to match Virgil Ortiz Jr. up against somebody who we really want to see him fight, and not another fighter on McKinson's level. Although, who knows? Maybe McKinson will go on to have a pretty damn respectable career. I mean, he's given a few fighters their first loss. Julius Armstrong, thanks for coming through. Heck yeah, welcome. Ventru in the house. What's going on? Heck yeah. Yeah, Julius Armstrong, you're right. Tevin Farmer versus Mickey Bay is this Friday. So don't wait for Saturday, because this is actually a Friday fight. I'm trying to drop a preview on that one, likely tomorrow, but if not tomorrow, Thursday for sure, even though that's cutting it close. Yeah, Stanionis, I would probably pick Stanionis to beat Keith Thurman today. I just don't know how much Thurman has left. And if you hear, the types of fighters that Thurman's been calling out, it doesn't seem like he's interested in necessarily fighting the best in the division. I mean, obviously he wants to get paid as much as possible, but I don't think he's got deep interest in fighting these youngins in the division right now. Keith Thurman, I mean, he's kind of been there, done that. Like, I don't think he would want to fight Virgil Ortiz, Boots Ennis, Stanionis, even Butayev. Now, he is calling out Conor Ben, but that's because he knows how massive of a fight it would be given Conor Ben's following in the UK. And we're going to go back and we're going to get to this recent fight announcement today that was made. And that is Conor Ben is going to be fighting Chris Eubank Jr. They were teasing it for a while, but now it looks like they finalized the date and a venue. So that fight, I'm expecting to see the actual flyer any day now, but it looks like it's official. They say it's reportedly finalized, which is a very interesting fight. And I was saying that that's good and bad as it pertains to Conor Ben's career, who I find his career to be very interesting right now. And I was just enjoying seeing him have like those gradual step-up fights. It's hard to imagine where he's going to go from here, given how much he's about to get paid against Chris Eubank Jr. Like, put it like this. The day that Conor McGregor fought Floyd Mayweather, my dad said he's not going to have a serious MMA career beyond this point. And now he has fought a couple fights. He's lost a lot more than he's won. But he was basically suggesting that given Conor McGregor how much he got paid against Floyd Mayweather, it's hard to get the fire in your belly and want to push yourself as hard as you could be pushed consistently once you make that type of money. So I do think that win, lose, or draw, after this fight against Chris Eubank Jr., I think Conor Ben's welterweight career is going to be in the danger zone. I don't expect him to go from fighting Chris Eubank Jr. at the O2 Arena in London to then fighting Butayev in the welterweight division. I don't see that type of trajectory taking place for Conor Ben, which is kind of unfortunate if that is the case, because you see his skills developing in real time. Like, I've been impressed. Like, he's already better than I ever thought he would be, even though we haven't seen his skills tested against the best just yet. Yes, Julius Armstrong said Thurman will get KO'd with a body shot. Yeah, you know what? You could definitely see that happening. But I could only see it happening if he's already taking a beating in the fight. I can see him getting finished to the body, but it's hard to see somebody with the heart and just with the pedigree of Keith Thurman to get stopped to the body if he hasn't already started to get broken down. Now, we've seen him get hurt badly to the body as far back as the Luis Collazo fight. Remember that? When Thurman was like kind of running around the ring, grabbing his side and looking like he was on the brink of getting like stopped against Collazo. Yeah, he's been pretty suspect to the body. And then obviously against Manny Pacquiao, we saw Thurman hurt to the body there as well. But it's you could certainly see if Thurman's in a very tough fight, especially at the age of, what is he now, like 34, 35, thereabout. You could see him getting stopped to the body, this version of Keith Thurman. Yeah, so TJ said the problem with Mickey Bey is that he's 39. Yeah, that is a big problem. Both fighters are very inactive over 2 years coming off a loss, but Bey has got the advantage as a real 135er. I'm edging Farmer in a close points win. You know, TJ, I'm kind of leaning that same way, and I think that the first half of the fight is going to be very competitive. I think Mickey Bey might even win majority of the early rounds. Now, I believe this is a 10-rounder, not a 12, right? So there's going to be less margin for giving up the early rounds if this is a 10-rounder and not a 12. But Mickey Bey has like a couple inches in height over Tevin Farmer. Yeah, 10-rounder, I believe. He's got a couple of inches in height over Farmer. And Farmer, like you said, he hasn't fought since before the COVID pandemic. That's when he lost to JoJo Diaz. It was like the first or second month of 2020, and he looked terrible. But he did break his hand in that fight, right? Like, I'm thinking, what the hell's wrong with Tevin Farmer? And we know Tevin Farmer has like the lazy eye. So he was doing this thing when he was like looking up multiple times per round against JoJo Diaz, where even the commentators were saying, what's wrong with Tevin Farmer? He looks like he keeps looking away during the fight with JoJo Diaz. I haven't found out what that was about. And the commentators were very familiar with Tevin Farmer, so they know that he's got, the eye issue, not functionally, just, in terms of where it appears to be directed. But they know that, because Tevin Farmer had been fighting on DAZN for several fights. He had been defending that 130-pound title like 5 times. It seemed like every few months. He was one of the most prominent American fighters fighting on DAZN for like a couple years, it seemed. But yeah, he just had his demeanor was kind of bizarre in that fight against JoJo Diaz. So it's going to be really interesting to see how he performs against Mickey Bey, who, has fought competitive fights with Rances Barthelemy. Again, former title holder. I believe he had beaten, was it Denis Shafikov, or was Shafikov who, no, I believe Shafikov is who he refused to fight, and he vacated his, he was going to fight for a vacant title against Shafikov and then ended up fighting for the vacant title against Barthelemy, something like that. But yeah, Mickey Bey held a share of the 135-pound title. And Mickey Bey in his prime, I would take over Tevin Farmer. But this 39 version of Mickey Bey, who has been out of the ring for a couple years, fought Kambosos a couple years ago, and he had like almost 2 years of inactivity before that. So he has had multiple spells of inactivity. So yeah, it's really hard to know what you're going to get there. Yeah, Brendan Jackson said, so when you said Boots versus, I think you were saying, did you mean Boots versus Conor Ben? Let me know if that's what you meant, because I'm assuming you either meant Boots versus Conor Ben or Boots versus Virgil Ortiz Jr. as being like a fight to make. Let's see. Ventru said, to be fair, I think McGregor's fighting style changed to more of a boxing stance. He really worsened his ability to fight grapplers and wrestlers. That is true. But we had seen him get taken down in like the Chad Mendes fight where he got hurt and taken down. I mean, he's always been a striker-heavy style fighter, which, by the way, I think that I'm also going to start trying to do a weekly MMA hour, basically. Not to take, who is it, Ariel Helwani, who had the MMA hour? Yeah, I'm not going to call it the MMA hour, but I do want to do like a weekly live chat to get into a lot of MMA as well. But yeah, you're right. Conor McGregor has been a lot more, we'll say, boxing happy as he's gotten older. Basically everything beyond the Floyd Mayweather fight, right? Where he used to mix in like the spin kicks, leg kicks. Obviously, Dustin Poirier was kicking the hell out of McGregor's leg, in the second and third time that they fought against each other. Yeah, Mickey Bey does have a sweet jab, TJ, and he has like that hook that he puts around a jab. So he'll like double up on the jab, and then he'll get busy with the jab and then a hook, all kinds of, and he'll find his opportunities to shoot the right as well. But it's that jab, jab, left hook combo and he'll jab high and low as well. Mickey Bey is super tricky. It's just, I see him fading in the late rounds like he did against George Kambosos. Because remember, he got dropped I think that the last round against Kambosos, Mickey Bey got dropped. So he had been kind of fading in the late rounds, even when he was like 36, 37 years old. So at 39, yeah, I don't expect him to be able to go like a hard 10 rounds. Yeah, Tevin Farmer had a zero power at 130. Tevin Farmer in an interview, I think it was with like the Ak and Barak, his own boxing show maybe, he said that he's been punching a lot harder at 135. I mean, we've got to see it to believe it, but that's at least what he's saying. And sometimes you see it. I'm trying to think of an example, a recent example of guys who seem to hit harder at a higher weight class. We've seen it before. We've seen it with Manny Pacquiao when he got to 147. We saw it with Canelo when he got to 168. Even though Canelo was always hitting hard, as was Pacquiao. But I feel like recently we saw another case of somebody hitting harder as they went up a division. And Tevin Farmer said that, he felt like he was just killing himself to make 130. So we'll see if his punching power improves at lightweight versus at 130. Yeah, you've seen him fight live before against John O'Carroll. Oh, so you saw that fight live. Nice. Farmer, yeah, slick dude. Which is interesting because he had a late start to boxing. He didn't start fighting until he was like 19 years old, I think is when he started. And for having like the quote-unquote slick style, usually guys who are like technicians in the ring, they have deep amateur pedigrees. Usually if somebody has, Bernard Hopkins is obviously an exception, right? But usually when somebody comes like way late to the sport, they're able to really succeed only if they have like special gifts, like Deontay Wilder's punching power. Like you can't teach that. You either have it or you don't. So Wilder was able to get away with coming to the sport late and not being a great technician. But yeah, Tevin Farmer being a southpaw and his whole style of fighting, it's very interesting that he was a latecomer to the sport and he was able to pick up on so much of the sweet science, right? Yeah, Mickey Bay's a big underdog in that fight against Farmer, which is pretty interesting. Tito Donis, thanks for coming through. Tito Donis in the house. Do you think Tio's esophagus issue was the main reason he lost? He had a credible doctor in NY vouch for him. So I just dropped the Teofimo Lopez versus Pedro Campa preview early this morning. Check it out if you haven't had a chance. But yeah, I do think that was a main reason why he lost, which we didn't learn about that until like well after the fight, right? So I do think that was a significant reason. Like he had no business being in the ring. And you see his dad/trainer being interviewed, admitting that he had no business being in the ring. But it sounded like he was powerless to make the call over Teofimo Lopez, which is kind of ridiculous. But that's what he says. So I do think that was an excuse. It doesn't speak to the bad strategy though. Because I think that, yes, that was an issue. But Teofimo Lopez is usually a very patient fighter. He works behind a jab, and he'll jab high, and he'll jab to the body. The fact that he came out so right-hand happy, I don't think I've ever seen Teofimo Lopez fight that recklessly without setting up the power punches. Even when he gets early stoppages, like he did when he won the IBF belt against Richard Comey, he started it off by setting up the jab, going high and low, even throwing the right hand to the body. So you're giving the opponent so much to think about, timing-wise and punch placement-wise, with the jab and the right hand to the body and the jab to the body, to then finally set up the big right hand. He fought George Kambosos, seriously, like it was going to be a 3-rounder. It was a terrible strategy. So while I would excuse Teofimo Lopez losing the fight due to the esophagus issue, it, to me, doesn't excuse the outright disrespectful strategy. It doesn't, Let's see. TJ said, Tito, a combination of things. Yeah, Tito, a combination of things pertaining to Teofimo Lopez and his performance against Kambosos. His father as trainer was a huge part, also making 135 hurt. Yeah, and that was some of the most bizarre instruction from his pops, right? In the early rounds where he was saying like, what are you doing? Take your time. And then he said, get him out of there already. Like in the same, between rounds, within 30 seconds of saying this, he said that. Super conflicting advice. Yeah, so I thought that kind of played into the bad strategy. Julius Armstrong said, Tevin had no power at 130, and he broke his hand versus JoJo Diaz. Yes, he did. And he reported that right after the first round. Plus, he got shot in his hand. Yeah, his hands are a liability, which makes boxing a big problem, right? Being shot in the hand. Now he's broken his hand. Didn't have a lot of power to begin with. So we'll see what he could do at 135. He needs this win over Mickey Bay. If he loses to a 39-year-old Mickey Bay, his prospects, because again, he was kind of kind of a big deal on DAZN, even though he also participated on some of those early Logan Paul or Jake Paul undercards. Remember that? I think Devin Haney fought Santiago on one of those undercards. Tevin Farmer fought a couple times on those undercards. I believe Demetrius Andrade fought a couple times on those undercards. Who was the guy who Demetrius Andrade fought right before Liam Williams? Somebody who he was hitting so hard in the early rounds. I think that was on one of those Jake Paul or Logan Paul undercards as well. But yeah, Tevin Farmer every few months was fighting on DAZN. So if he loses his title like he did to JoJo Diaz at 130, then goes up and loses his 135-pound debut against Mickey Bay at 39, it's hard to imagine that he has much success beyond that. Like it's just there'll be such an uphill battle to climb at that point. Brendan Jackson said, yes, Boots versus Ortiz. All right, yeah, gotcha. So, you know, I like most people who I talk to about that fight really think that Boots would handily beat Virgil Ortiz, including my cousin. We just talked about it last night. I tend to think that Virgil Ortiz will be way more competitive than that. I don't think it's any foregone conclusion that Boots beats Virgil Ortiz. We haven't seen Boots like go deep into fights yet. First of all, Boots' best win is still against Thomas Delorme, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Like it's either Sergey Lipinets is probably his best win, right? Even though Lipinets had his best moments at 140. But so did Delorme. He had his best moments lighter than 147. So those are Boots' best wins. So it's hard to say how he's going to handle tough moments where plan A or plan B doesn't work. And he's dragged into, you know, the middle rounds of a fight that's a battle of attrition and where you're getting hit as almost as much as you're doing the hitting, and you start getting hit to the body. Like there are all kinds of like issues that you could have in fights that I just haven't seen Boots Ennis confronted with yet. So like when somebody asked me the question recently, is Boots Ennis underrated or overrated? Or just they were asking me if he is overrated. And I said, you know, based on his accomplishments, maybe a little overrated, but based on the eye test and his performances, like what we've seen and what appears to potentially be the case, no, not overrated, maybe even underrated, because he's looking special, but he's looking special in such small sample sizes. Even though, I mean, he totally dominated Sergey Lipinets, but it looked like Lipinets needed like a trampoline to even get to Boots Ennis, not only because of the height, but because of the reach. Lipinets is what, like 5'6" or something like that? Again, Lipinets was smaller or about the same size as Mikey Garcia. So I thought Lipinets was going to be more competitive against Boots than he was, but again, I've seen a lot more from Virgil Ortiz Jr. I've seen him get hit. Look, they didn't call that knockdown a knockdown against Mean Machine Kavyaskis, but look, I know a knockdown when I see one. And he got hurt like twice or 3 times in that fight against Kavyaskis. But you see how he fights when he starts getting backed up. Yes, you can picture Virgil Ortiz getting hurt, getting dropped. You could picture him getting stopped, but you could also picture that whoever's going to be doing the stopping to have to go through hell to get the stoppage, because Virgil Ortiz starts to come out guns blazing once he starts feeling backed up. And again, he's got a great jab, and he's just relentless to the body. So yeah, I would love to see Boots Ennis versus Virgil Ortiz Jr. In fact, if I had like a top 10 fights in any division that I'd want to see in the sport, that would be one of them. Boots versus Virgil Ortiz. It would be like the 2 best prospects in today's game. Or at least 2 of the best. Well, you can't even call them prospects. They're contenders now, right? They're mandatories. So it's hard to call them prospects, but it's hard to, I mean, they've only been on the map for like a couple years, really, right? So prospects turn into contenders like that. If you're looking good enough and shining bright in your moments, it happens quickly. Let's see. I saw somebody had asked, what do I think about Deontay Wilder versus Helenius? Let me see who had asked that question. But I haven't seen it to be official yet. I know that reportedly that's what they're looking at. Nothing official. I mean, they were obviously just sparring as Wilder was about to fight that trilogy fight with Tyson Fury, and Robert Helenius was about to fight that rematch against Adam Kownacki. They were training together, and Helenius has trained with so many different people. That would be a good comeback fight for Wilder, I think. I still think Wilder beats majority of the top 10 guys at heavyweight. There are a couple guys I think he might have trouble with, but man, he's got such prodigious power, it's ridiculous. But my thoughts on it is that Wilder wins by stoppage, by knockout. I do think that Wilder still knocks Helenius out, even though Helenius is a pretty good fighter. I would still go Wilder there. We'll see if it's announced. Tio didn't even bring a cut man. Yeah, there were a lot of things, which, just the turmoil in his camp, in his life, in his family, it makes me wonder, even going forward, because every person, when they're making their comeback, sound like they are ready to go. They're rejuvenated, fresher than ever. They've got a new mindset. It always sounds great. But look, I couldn't say I would be surprised if Teofimo Lopez starts running into the same hurdles where he's super stressed out and has got a lot going on before a fight, and that because of that, the fight doesn't go his way. And I wouldn't be surprised if something like that happens again in the near future for Teo. Not necessarily in this fight against Pedro Campa, but you get what I'm saying. In his next 2 or 3 fights, depending on who he's going to be fighting against. There's certain things where if they don't get corrected and the mind state isn't adjusted permanently, can you even adjust your mind state permanently? I don't know. That's a philosophical question. But going forward, I have a lot of reservations on how Teofimo Lopez will do. Talent-wise, he could be a Hall of Famer, no question, talent-wise. But there are more factors than talent when it comes to boxing, right? And when it comes to how your career plays out ultimately. Franco H in the house. Thanks for coming through. He said, hi, bro. When you have time to answer, what are your thoughts against Zurdo versus Bivol? Who you got? So I will do a preview as we near the fight date if that fight is officially announced. But my gut tells me that Bivol pulls it off. Even though, man, Zurdo's looking huge at light heavyweight right now, right? At first, I hope they make this fight. And I do want to see who does it look like Buatsi is going to fight if Zurdo fights Bivol, because you saw Eddie Hearn try to make his play for Buatsi versus Bivol. But if I forgot who they said Buatsi would likely be fighting against if it is indeed Bivol versus Zurdo. But if they make that fight, I would have to go with Bivol via decision. That's what I would pick today. But I would do a lot more. Just a lot more research before I do the preview video, but just based on what I've seen from both guys, I would go Bivol on that one right now. But Zurdo is looking really good thus far. Oh, speaking of which, remember I was just saying whose punching power seems to be carrying as they go up in weight? Zurdo Ramirez, former belt holder. What was he? The WBO champ for some time at 168. Wasn't a power puncher at 168. He's looking like a power puncher at 175. So that's actually exactly the guy who I was thinking of. Let's see. There was one that I wanted to get to. So Brendan Jackson just asked, said, Inoue was KOing dudes way more viciously when he moved up to 118. That's another one. Yeah, you're right. You are right. Julius Armstrong sees Bivol knocking Zurdo Ramirez out. Damn. Wow. Okay. Zurdo Ramirez, I mean, he does have a chin. Remember that fight he had 2 fights ago? It was between the Sullivan Barrera fight and the and his most recent fight. If you can remember the guy's name, let me know. But he was getting rocked. Zurdo was getting blasted in that fight. I'm like, damn. Is he about to get stopped by this, by this way lesser known opponent? Zurdo was getting hit way too much in that fight for my liking. T Smack's in the house. What's going on? Thank you for coming through, T Smack. TJ also likes Zurdo in that fight. Let's see. Tito Donis said there's an interview that came out where Tio said he was right, where he was right and happy because he knew something was wrong when he was warming up. And then TJ said, FD for only plus 340. Oh, FanDuel. Which fight are you talking about with those odds? Yeah, Franco said Boots is fighting Class C fighters. I agree. Virgil has way more difficult opponents. Yeah, thus far, right? So I'm curious to see who they matchmake Boots Ennis up against with, which it sounds like Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr., or should I say Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford. It sounds like they're closer than ever. Again, I'll see it. I'll believe it when I see it or read it. But if they make that fight, I'm assuming they probably want to put Boots Ennis on the undercard, unless they want to match Boots up against somebody else and move the Boots Ennis date elsewhere. But that would make for a great card if you get Boots against a good fighter on the undercard of Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford. I just hope they announce that fight finally. Yeah, Boots versus Stanionis would answer a lot of exactly. It would answer questions. Stanionis is a very good fighter, and he looked very good against Butayev in that win. His jab is one of the best in the division, straight up, like great jab. And there are a lot of great jabs in that division. So a couple of other things that I wanted to get to really quickly. Maurice Hooker, I don't know what to say. Like he looked pretty terrible, especially in those first couple rounds. I know he was overweight by 3 pounds going into that fight against Blair Cobbs. And he had his mentor, I forgot her name, Stacy something, had passed away. So he had a heavy heart going into the fight, was dedicating the fight to her. But man, like he was just getting caught so cleanly against Bear Cobbs, who moves around the ring pretty well, you know, shoots his power punches. Cobbs looked pretty good, but he was dragged into a, you know, kind of a brawl in the middle to late rounds. But Cobbs was still winning the majority of even those rounds. So, yeah, you know, you want to give Hooker a mulligan, but now he's lost 3 out of his last 4 fights. Been stopped in 2 of those fights, and the fight that he wasn't stopped in, he got dropped 3 times in the first 2 rounds. Pretty terrible outing for Maurice Hooker. Biggest win of Blair Cobb's career, hands down. It's going to be interesting to see who they match make him with next at Golden Boy. Not against Alexis Rocha, right? That's who he's got his 1 loss against. But Blair Cobbs, I think, is a little better than a lot of people, including myself, thought he was. And then obviously we got Michael Conlan against Marriaga last weekend as well. Michael Conlan looked pretty impressive. That was a danger. I was surprised Conlan came back like 6 months after that devastating loss against Lee Wood. I thought it was way too soon, but I still picked Conlan, but I thought it was going to be a close and pretty difficult decision. It was not a difficult decision. It's almost like he had Marriaga hypnotized for like 3/4 of the fight before Marriaga even got going. Marriaga didn't put his foot on the gas until like the 8th or 9th round in a 10-round fight. So it's weird. Conlan's only like 1 or 2 inches taller than Marriaga, but he looked way taller than Marriaga, had a way longer reach than Marriaga, and he stands with a wider stance. So I was like, how is Michael Conlan only a couple inches taller than Marriaga, but he's bending at the knees and is still taller than Marriaga? It was kind of interesting, but Conlan looked really good. But he does tend to get dragged into difficult exchanges in the middle to late rounds. So if you could get somebody who's able to like kind of walk through his early boxing ability and then make it a difficult phone booth and just a grimy style fight in the middle and late rounds, I think you can still get to Michael Conlan. But at least in those early rounds, he looks pretty dang good because he changes levels so much and he's shooting that up jab and he seems to have a very long reach for the division. Let's see. L. Anthony's in the house. Thanks for coming through. Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you. So let me see. I just lost the comment. Yeah, he said, I think Boots would reach his peak when he moves to 154, 160. Yeah, given his height, he definitely has some room to grow. But here's the thing. I don't know yet how durable he will be in taking like a lot of punches, right? Even at 147. So I think that he would still be, I think he's potentially a great fighter. And if he could absorb the punch well at 147, then yeah, maybe he could carry up and be as good or even better possibly at 154, maybe even at 160. But I still have to see his punch absorption at 147. It's one thing to see if your punching power carries as you go up in weight. It's another thing to see if you're able to take the punches as you go up in weight. So yeah, we'll see, but definitely a possibility given his frame. Yeah, he's got room to grow. It's kind of it's pretty amazing that he's able to get down to 147 consistently to fight. We'll see how long that lasts. Jay Foreman's in the house. What's going on? Thanks for coming through. Yeah, TJ said resumes don't win fights. Boots is high risk, low reward. Yeah, I agree. Well, high risk, low reward. See, I look at high risk, low reward right now as being like Demetrius Andrade if he does defend the belt against Janibek. Because Boots, at least in name recognition, is still bigger than Janibek. But you're right. He's not holding a belt, right? Boots Ennis isn't holding a belt. There's still a lot of unknowns. So if somebody hit Boots and knocked him out and knocked him out in the way that Sergio Martinez knocked Paul Williams, the Punisher, out in their rematch, and people might look at Boots Ennis and say, oh, well, he had a suspect chin to begin with. And then it's like you lose credit for knocking the guy out. So he's just proven enough for you to know that he's dangerous offensively, but still too unproven to know that he's durable to where you know that you're going to get full credit for beating the guy. So yeah, maybe he is high risk, low reward. TJ said Ugas has a better resume than Ortiz and Boots, but they would both stop him faster than Spence. You think so? See, I'm not so sure about that. I would be interested, in fact, to see Ugas versus Virgil Ortiz Jr. Like, look, Virgil Ortiz is very good, but look, Ugas is getting older now. He's either 35 or 36, right? But like boxing-wise, I could see Ortiz running into a lot of punches, trying to over pursue on Ugas. Like, he just knows how to counter by shooting his right hand, and he varies up his style of how he throws his combinations. I could see Ortiz running into some problems with Ugas. Not to say he doesn't win, but I would like to see it. I would like to see it. I'll put it like that. Like Stanionis might beat Ugas, but I've seen Ugas in way more intense and dangerous situations, than I've seen the others. Like, for instance, if you rewind the clock like 2-3 years on Sean Porter, how do you think Virgil Ortiz does against Sean Porter? I really don't know the answer to that. We know Porter's durable as hell. We know that he comes forward like for the entire fight, and he's got like a relentless attack. Yes, he does smother his own punches at times, but I couldn't say that that Virgil Ortiz, for instance, stops Sean Porter. I don't know. And if you don't stop Sean Porter, which only one person did, right? Was able to fight through and still potentially come out victorious. Sometimes we see fighters look like they're shining early, and then the first time they really run into trouble, they tuck tail and they bail. Like, remember the first time, I think it was his first loss, Victor Ortiz, not Virgil Ortiz Jr., but Victor Ortiz, when he fought the then lesser-known Maidana, and Maidana kind of got him to quit, where the ref was acting Victor Ortiz after Ortiz. Oh, shoot. No sound? My bad. 1 second. Let's go. We're going to get through this. Let me know if you guys can hear me now. Back on. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, what I was saying is resume does, in my opinion, stand for something because it lets you know what the guy is willing to fight through. So with Victor Ortiz, I must have run out audio-wise like a while back. My bad. I didn't catch it. I think I'm a little bit behind on the comments. That's why I saw like an older comment saying it. Thank you for notifying me. But yeah, the referee asked him if he wanted to continue, and he dropped Maidana a couple times in the early rounds. And then Maidana dropped him a couple times. They were like at a point exchanging knockdowns. And he basically at the end of the day saw, hey man, I can't put this guy away. And this guy apparently wants all the smoke. I mean, the guy's got a tattoo of a gun on his hip. Maidana does. And so Victor Ortiz said, like, basically, no. He kind of gave like that ref, like, do you really want me to answer the question if I want to continue? You ain't going to make me answer that in front of all these people, are you? And he basically insinuated like, nah, I'm done. And then the ref waved it off. And then Victor Ortiz gave one of the most, like, I guess you could say honest post-fight interviews I've ever seen. Like, he basically said, I care about my health too much to get put through this. That's what he was saying, and he sounded like he wasn't even sure if he wanted to fight anymore. So sometimes we see guys who are like very impressive offensively, and they could be very impressive defensively, but there's offense and then there's defense, And then there's heart and durability. There's just a lot of boxes you need to check before you are like a certified, certified badass. And again, Boots Ennis looks like a badass. He appears to be, but I don't know. I don't know. I know Ugas is, but I know that there are limits. I mean, we saw Ugas get stopped, but Ugas, I know, is willing to fight a very, very difficult fight. Even the fight against Sean Porter, I mean, that wasn't a walk in the park. Let's see. Yeah, my bad if I fall behind a little bit on the comments, guys. I'm gonna get to some of these. Julius Armstrong said Andy Ruiz versus Luis Ortiz is flying under the radar. It sure is, and it's a pay-per-view too, which is a little bit crazy. But yeah, I can't wait to break that one down. I'm thinking Andy Ruiz early, probably by stoppage. I mean, Luis Ortiz did get dropped by Charles Martin, and Andy Ruiz does put the punches together very well. And Ortiz is, what, like 43 now? 42, 43? So I would favor Andy Ruiz. But, yeah, I want to look a little closer and see if maybe he would have trouble with a sweet science southpaw with power like Luis Ortiz. And you're right. Somebody said that Ruiz looked suspect against Ruiz looked suspect against Areola, and TJ just said Ortiz looked suspect against Charles Martin. Yeah, both of you are right. Yeah. Let's see. But yeah, Brendan Jackson said Ruiz looked suspect versus Areola. I agree with both of those. Let's see. Patient Teo is dangerous. Yeah, Brendan Jackson, I agree. Teofimo Lopez, if he's on his game, fighting a patient style of fight, he's just such a sharp power puncher, and he's diligent. He's strong bodily. I might even favor him to beat Gervonta Davis slightly, maybe. I would maybe favor him to beat Ryan Garcia, which it sounds like Oscar De La Hoya, which is another thing I wanted to get to. He basically just said that he's like PBC or Mayweather Promotions and Gervonta Davis' team, basically, as it pertains to him, fighting Ryan Garcia, was basically playing games. Like, he said that they're playing games and we're going to move on. Now, I don't know if that is just a negotiation tactic. He's basically saying they're not answering their calls, which just sounds terrible, right? If you accuse somebody of just being that, unprofessional, that they're not even picking up their phone, that's not a good look, especially when you're calling about conducting some, business. But it sounds like De La Hoya is giving some discouraging news about the possibility of Tank Davis versus Ryan Garcia. And then he said, we're going to move on, and we're looking at Teofimo Lopez, which I kind of think he might be BSing there a little bit. I don't know. I don't see him rushing Ryan Garcia into a fight with Teofimo. I would favor Teofimo Lopez, but hey, every time I say something about Ryan Garcia, which, I knew that he was talented, but he's just looking more and more impressive every fight. But, Javier Fortuna, no, he wasn't a true guy at 140. Neither was Emmanuel Tego. But, I would love to see Teo versus Ryan Garcia, but I think I would favor Teofimo. Teofimo Lopez, and he's an incredible athlete as well. If you look at his workouts, he's super coordinated, super strong, and his strength it's like a sustained strength. Like some of the workouts that he's doing, where he's doing the pull-up, going into the pushing up off of the pull-up bar, and then going back down, bringing the knees up, bringing the legs out, and just rinse, repeat, and just doing a ton of that. You can see that he's like a gym rat, and he's doing things that a lot of other guys, a lot of professional fighters just simply can't do bodily. Like, not everybody is born equal athletically, and Teofimo Lopez just seems like he's an athletic outlier as well as a skilled boxer. That's a problem. That's a problem for a lot of people. Let's see. Yeah, you're right, TJ. Zurdo Ramirez looks really good at 175. Massive, too. He's thumping. Yeah, he's coming into some of those fights looking like he's 200 plus, fighting at 175. Crazy that he was able to make 168 for as long as he was able to. I just hope that I just hope that they make that fight between him and Bivol. That fight should happen. Ruiz got caught with the right hook behind the head. Ortiz got dropped by a jab. So TJ so yeah, you're right. Ortiz got dropped by a jab. Was it a remember when Roy Jones Jr. knocked Felix Trinidad down with the jab? And sometimes when you step into getting hit by a jab, it can knock you down because you're walking into the punch. So I'd have to rewatch it, but I don't know definitively whether that knockdown of Ortiz, whether it was like a, oh man, I just got rocked and put on my butt and I got hit to where I got hurt and dropped, versus I got hit when I was halfway through my step, therefore I was off balance and got knocked down. Either way, a knockdown is a knockdown, but I get what you're saying, that it was a different kind of knockdown that Ortiz got dropped with, rather than Andy Ruiz getting hit behind the ear or behind the head. Was it behind the ear or behind the head? Because sometimes it could be a legal shot that's still near behind the head versus like a straight up rabbit punch that's closer to like the mid back of your head, right? This is kind of like the gray area where you see legitimate knockdowns and knocking somebody off balance occur, right? Ortiz did get dropped twice against Arreola. Yeah, you're right. Ortiz didn't look good, right? Until he got that stoppage. And even, there were fights prior for Ortiz, like when he fought, I want to say it might have been Christian Hammer, where he won the fight, but he didn't look like the same guy who beat Bryant Jennings, which is still Luis Ortiz's best win, which is crazy, right? Because he's been fighting now professionally for several years. Yeah, his legs did look horrible. He looks old, straight up. His legs look old. Just like Derek Chisora's legs look old. He won the fight, but that's why he was spending so much time against the ropes, because it's like you don't want to have to keep on traveling to the middle of the ring and handling the exchanges there. You don't have to keep the same balance when you're doing this against the ropes. But yeah, I expect Ortiz to be easier to work towards the ropes with his legs being so bad and just old, But yeah, he didn't look great against Christian Hammer either. He won the fight, but it's not the same. It's not the same Luis Ortiz that even came in to that first fight against Deontay Wilder. But yeah, it's just crazy that Luis Ortiz's best win is still against Bryant Jennings, in my opinion. Let's see. TJ said, took Conlan on points. His footwork and hand speed too much. Yeah, congratulations. If you bet on that one, yeah. And you took Cobbs too. Nice. So TJ must have felt that Maurice Hooker was already kind of a quote-unquote shot fighter coming into that fight against Blair Cobbs. For you to have picked Cobbs, given the odds kind of made it incentivize you to pick Cobbs, but to pick Cobbs, you must have had faith that he was going to win, which means that, Maurice Hooker is already well past his prime, now having been stopped by Jose Ramirez and against Virgil Ortiz Jr. coming into that fight against Blair Cobbs. It's actually pretty impressive that Maurice Hooker made it the distance in that fight, right? That required a lot of heart. Let's see. TJ said, don't get it twisted. I do not rate Martin as a top 10. Yeah. Let's see. Rewind the clock on the Thomas Delorme fight. He got robbed against Ugas. That was a super close fight. And you know what? His fight against, I want to say, Stanionis, that was a close fight as well for Thomas Delorme. He's had like the wrong end of the stick on a couple of very good fights. Yeah, you were originally favoring Maurice Hooker. Maurice Hooker, like when he was at his best, which I think Hooker's best win is probably against Terry Flanagan, I would say, might be Hooker's best win when he won a share of the 140 belt, even though Flanagan was a former 135-pound champ fighting for the vacant title at 140. But yeah, that might still be Hooker's best win. But let's see. Beck Bully Melikuziev looked good last weekend. I can't wait to see him back against some of the best at 168. I'd love to see him against some of the elite there. Let's see if he's been fighting on which card was he on? He's on he fights on DAZN, right? So okay, so who does Golden Boy have? He might have to, Golden Boy might have to work with Eddie Hearn in Matchroom to properly match Beck Bully against good 168-pounders. I'll say that. Yeah, Beck Bully's a really good fight. Look, that Gabe Rosado knockout, I don't want to say fluke because he did time it and position it, but, if they were to fight again, I would bet on Beck Bully over Gabe Rosado right now. Take nothing away from Gabe Rosado, but Beck Bully I just think is a better all-around fighter right now. Gabe Rosado just lost to Shane Mosley Jr. I didn't think I'd see the day, you know? It's going to be interesting to see who Shane Mosley Jr. fights next. Xander Zayas, you're right. He is fighting this weekend as well. Yeah, Xander Zayas, one of the he had to postpone his last fight because he had gotten sick or something, right? Was it an injury or sickness? But yeah, he's one of the most promising prospects in the game right now. Let's see. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on the new fight announcement of Conor Ben versus Chris Eubank Jr. So they just announced that one. And I was saying a little bit earlier, I really wanted to see how Conor Ben would do going forward at 147, just matchmaking wise. I just wanted to see him start fighting better and better fighters in the division. But now I kind of doubt that we're going to see that sort of a career trajectory for Conor Ben, because he's about to make outrageous money against Chris Eubank Jr., which this is a weird fight. You've got somebody who's kind of just breaking the top 10 in the division at 147 for Conor Ben. Conor Ben is a lot younger than Chris Eubank Jr. And Chris Eubank Jr. was a good fighter at 160. He never held a major title at 160, but he's a good fighter at 160. And then he went up to 168. He's had success at 168, but he lost to George Groves, who's a very good fighter. So this is just a weird fight for Conor Ben, which makes you think that it's kind of a possible, I hate to call it a cash out fight. It's a cash grab. Usually when you say cash out, you're saying that the guy wants to just take the money and run, right? You just take the money and, to hell with my career. I just got paid. I don't want to say that this is that, but it's almost like the money is too good to pass up on. So even if Conor Ben truly did have, or even still does have plans to keep on progressing in his division, you can't pass up just crazy money like that. So you would have to favor Chris Eubank Jr. Chris Eubank Jr. has fought big, strong fighters, and Conor Ben, who are the best guys that he's fought? Chris Algieri, Adrian Granados, Samuel Vargas, who he knocked out in the first round. That was impressive. It at least took Virgil Ortiz a few rounds to stop Samuel Vargas. Granted, Samuel Vargas wasn't he didn't get knocked out. They stopped the fight, but he was just getting blasted repeatedly. So Conor Ben, and he fought Chris Van Heerden recently. So he's been fighting gradual step up in opponents, except for the Van Heerden one. I can't say that was a step up. But he's fighting somebody who's way more proven at a division, 2 divisions, and 3 divisions up. Chris Eubank Jr. has done more at 168 and at 160 than Conor Ben has done at 147. And the catch weight for this fight is going to be 156. So the money was almost too good to deny. I mean, their dads fought twice, famously. Both of their dads, Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank Sr., were both middleweight champions, and they were both super middleweight champions. So they both won belts at 160 and at 168. And the first time they fought, which was, I believe, 1990, Nigel Benn was the longtime champion. Chris Eubank came in and stopped him in the 11th round. And took his title. 11th round of I think this was a 12-round fight. I don't think they were still doing 15-rounders then. But so Nigel Benn got stopped by Chris Eubank Sr. In 1990 to take the middleweight belt. And then 3 years later, 1993, they were both belt holders, both at the same time, belt holders at 168. And they fought to a draw in the rematch. This was a title unification fight at 168, and they fought to a draw. So there's just mad history there. And in the UK, this was such a big deal. So this is going to be this is actually kind of it's an odd super fight in a way, just because of how big of names they are. So, Conor Ben wasn't gonna get that kind of money fighting Virgil Ortiz Jr. or fighting Stanionis or any one of these guys that are just kind of on the outskirts of the 147-pound top 10. He wasn't going to get paid like that. So, you could argue he would be a fool not to take it. But my concern is, And maybe the catch weight kind of helps with this, even though it's still 168. So he still has to fight nearly 10 pounds, above it. He doesn't have to come in 10 pounds heavier, but Chris Eubank is allowed to weigh in at 9 pounds heavier than Conor Benn's actual, fight weight. So my concern for Conor Ben, who is having a much more interesting career than Chris Eubank Jr., just because Chris Eubank Jr. has been around for a while now and still hasn't been getting like the fights that matter in recent years. Like he hasn't fought like a Charlo or Andrade. He fought Billy Joe Saunders. Billy Joe Saunders gave him his only other loss other than George Groves. Billy Joe Saunders was the first to beat Chris Eubank Jr. That was back, that was a few years ago, several years ago. But in recent years, we haven't seen Chris Eubank Jr. fight meaningful fights. That was a good win against Liam Williams, and he did drop him and just made him look bad, especially in the early rounds. But his output was so bad in the second half of the fight, which, that wasn't great. But still, I worry that Conor Ben is going to look like Kell Brook fighting Gennady Golovkin. Granted, the styles are different, but Chris Eubank Jr. is just so much bigger than Conor Ben. Not so much height-wise. It's only like a maybe 2-inch height advantage. But, he's got a longer reach, and he just has a naturally bigger body, like shoulder to shoulder. Like Chris Eubank could never get down to like 147. He just, maybe when he was in his early 20s he could have, but not any time recently. So I just wonder what Conor Ben is going to do about. Another thing about Chris Eubank Jr. is he fights like a Roy Jones light style, like a Jean Pascal-ish style, but he hits hard and he's got quick hands. So Conor Ben he might get devastated. He might get kind of embarrassed against Chris Eubank Jr. if Chris Eubank Jr. isn't just totally weight drained trying to make the 156-pound limit. Yeah, I agree, TJ. I don't necessarily think I don't think Conor Ben beats Liam Williams at 154. Liam Williams is a good fighter. Liam Williams went the distance against Demetrius Andrade. I couldn't picture Conor Ben going the distance against Demetrius Andrade. So yeah, I don't love the fight for Conor Ben's career, but yeah, congratulations on the money that he's going to make. But again, it's hard to picture him making what he's about to make in this fight and then putting the hard hat back on, getting back to work and trying to go back and work up the ranks against, other, top 6 through top 10 147 pounders. I don't know how that's going to play out. Yeah, TJ, yeah, Conor Ben's chin is going to be a concern against Chris Eubank Jr. Julius Armstrong said Eubank will stop Ben. Ben has never been tested. Yeah, you're right. Let's see. In his last 5 fights, who's come the closest to testing Ben? Adrian Granados was just running away. Chris Van Heerden got stopped super early, as did Samuel Vargas. Chris Algieri, kinda. He tried to box him unsuccessfully and got devastatingly knocked out. But maybe Chris Eubank or Conor Ben had to figure some things out to score the knockout over Algieri, even though he seemed to be having success pretty early. But yeah, we haven't seen Conor Ben in trouble. Conor Ben hasn't been any more tested than Boots Ennis, right? So it's hard to, and we've seen, Chris Eubank Jr. fight not only good, but possibly great fighters. Well, we'll say very, very good fighters. Billy Joe Saunders, I can't call him great. Very, very good. George Groves, maybe not great, but close to it. Very, very good. We've seen Chris Eubank Jr. fight very good fighters. So, yeah, I don't see how this goes well for Conor Ben unless, again, Chris Eubank is just so weight drained that he can't sustain a punch. Like, Chad Dawson when he fought Andre Ward, or Antonio Tarver when he fought Bernard Hopkins, something like that. Not to take anything away from Bernard Hopkins beating Tarver or Ward beating Chad Dawson. Those were both very, very, very good accomplishments. Yeah, you're right. But when Chris Eubank Jr. beat James DeGale, which he did beat Arthur Abraham too, he retired James DeGale, right? That was DeGale's final fight, and Chris Eubank Jr. looked super dangerous. Like, DeGale wasn't given any breathing room. He was just getting battered. That fight went the distance, I believe. It went the distance, but man, it was like I was surprised to see DeGale hang on that badly, or that after getting beaten that badly. To be honest, I don't think DeGale was ever the same after that, what was it, a split draw against Badu Jack. Remember that fight? That was like a fight of the year contender. That was a brutal, brutal fight between James DeGale and Badu Jack. So, okay, Conor Ben has been knocked down before against a journeyman. So that must have been like early in his career, right? So yeah, I don't see this going well for Conor Ben. Let's see. So before we wrap, I wanted to bring up one or two more things. Tyson Fury versus Derek Chisora. It sounds like he's interested in fighting a trilogy fight. It's not a rubber match because Tyson Fury beat Chisora twice, first by decision, then by knockout. But now, I don't know if he's just teasing, trolling, or whatever, or if he's actually interested in fighting and coming out of his, short-lived retirement to fight Derek Chisora. And if he does fight Chisora, I don't see any way that he doesn't knock Chisora out unless he just fights like a back foot style fight against Chisora. Then maybe it goes a distance, but I don't think anybody really has an appetite for Fury versus Chisora 3. Because again, it's not like Chisora fought him a draw once. It's not like Chisora beat him once. Tyson Fury had his way, they were both pretty tough fights, but beat Chisora twice. It's just kind of random that he's coming out and calling out, a third fight with Derek Chisora. And then I wanted to talk just a little bit about Gary Russell Jr. kind of updating us on his shoulder issue. Sounds like he's still recovering from it, and it sounds like he is unsure whether he's going to return to the ring, period. It sounds like Gary Russell Jr. might not come back to boxing, but he said he's about 40% recovery-wise with his shoulder, and that's not even 40% boxing-wise. He said he's just trying to get back to being able to use his shoulder functionally. So if he can't use it functionally, he said he could throw a jab with it, but he said it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel good yet. And he's 34 years old now or something like that. So it seems like it's a long road to getting back into the ring and fighting, some of the best fighters out there. But he said if he does return to the ring, he doesn't want to continue at 126. He said he wants to pursue Gervonta Tank Davis. He said that's who he wants to test his shoulder out against. Sounds like a bad decision to me, but at least take a tune-up or two, right? But he sounds like he has no interest in reclaiming his title or any title at 126. So sounds like that ship has sailed. Ring Magazine might as well adjust their, 126 top 10. But I get it. They're going to give him a year or something like that to make it official, to remove him from the rankings. But it sounds like Russell's not going to return to featherweight if he does come back, which is in question in itself. Let's see. Yeah, I agree, TJ. He should maybe just train his brother, Gary Antoine, who, again, doesn't have the hand speed of big brother Gary Russell Jr., but is looking like a very good fighter, potentially very good fighter. Jay Foreman said, Fury will say anything to not fight Usyk, saying he's retiring, saying he's fighting MMA guys, calling out Chisora. I do think Fury would come and do an exhibition and just, take a bunch of money for an exhibition. So I agree. He doesn't seem to want to fight Usyk. Is it because Usyk's not a huge name? Or is it because he thinks that Usyk is a stylistic issue for him? Why do you think Fury doesn't want to fight Usyk? Because I agree. It seems like he doesn't have interest in fighting Usyk, who he keeps calling a blown up middleweight, which is just cold. But why doesn't he want to fight him? Is it just he doesn't motivate me type of thing? Or is it I don't know how I would do against him type of thing? Because obviously Fury wants Anthony Joshua to beat Usyk. You get that impression, right? So then they could get together for like a super, super fight. Let's see. Brandon Jackson said Usyk is a bad matchup. Yeah, potentially. So do you think that even at 35, 36, that he still has the legs to advance on Fury and land clean shots while slipping Fury's, because Fury feints a lot. Remember when he fought Vladimir Klitschko, how much feinting he was doing and how much feinting he was doing in the first fight against Deontay Wilder? Now, you look at the fight against Otto Wallin, and you see the success that Wallin had in the early rounds against Fury. And you wonder, yeah, somebody with quick hands, somebody who's a good mover, a good athlete, how would they do against Tyson Fury? And, you know, Usyk might be a smaller fighter, but he's 6'3", right? He's not 6'1", he's not 6 feet. He's a 6'3" guy, which, I mean, he's only 2 inches shorter or 3 inches shorter than Anthony Joshua. So going into that first fight, I thought Anthony Joshua was going to look a lot bigger than Usyk. Not a little bigger, but a lot bigger. He didn't look that much bigger than Usyk, which, you know, that's concerning for AJ going into this rematch as well. But, yeah, Brendan Jackson said, Usyk has been looking sharp in training for the AJ rematch. Looks like he might show up almost 20 pounds heavier. So coming into the first fight against AJ, what was he, 225, thereabout? Oh, by the way, guys, hit the like button if you haven't. I always forget to even mention that. But yeah, that's always much, much appreciated. But you said, yeah, so if he was 225, I think he was 225 going into the first fight against AJ, you're saying that he's going to potentially come in at 240? If he comes out at 240, I don't know if I love that in the middle rounds, but I'm assuming Usyk knows what he's doing. He's been knowing what he's doing his whole career. Amateur, Olympics, cruiserweight division, heavyweight division. He's just been like unbelievably successful. So I'm assuming that he knows what he's doing with his body. I mean, for Usyk's sake, you wouldn't want to come in with AJ and be less mobile, right? I don't know. I feel like that could cut both ways. Maybe he's going to hit harder, but it's hard to picture that his legs will be as active. If you rewatch the first 3 rounds, look at how Usyk's moving his feet against Joshua. It's unbelievable. It's hard to imagine that at 240 or 245 that he will be as agile as he was in those first few rounds against AJ in the first fight. Jay Foreman said it's Usyk's style. He isn't scared. He just isn't fully convinced that he beats Usyk. If Usyk is not a challenge, why not just run through him and become undisputed? Yeah, that's what I would think, right? So maybe, look, maybe Tyson Fury is just barking and just saying these things. Who knows? If Usyk beats Anthony Joshua a second time, maybe Tyson Fury just starts talking tremendous trash and says, let's do it. Like yeah, I don't know what Fury's thinking. I don't know how confident he is, but I mean, at 6'9", you would have to think that it's going to be, I mean, literally an uphill climb for Usyk to get to the chin. Now, you could say that Usyk could do the stuff where he's jabbing to the body, and you would assume that his hands are a little bit quicker than Tyson Fury's, but Tyson Fury can do, look, let me ask you this. I think I might have paused for just a second. It might cut audio for just a moment. But at this age, because remember, Tyson Fury isn't in his 20s anymore, the way that he was when he was fighting Vladimir Klitschko and guys before that, where he was like a great mover. At his recent weights, can Tyson Fury still move where he's truly a back foot fighter who's able to move around the ring in the way that he did against, you know, Vladimir Klitschko and he did in some of his earlier fights? You know, I feel like as good as Tyson Fury still is, that he is more heavy-footed at 270, 265, 275. I feel like he moves a little bit heavier than he used to. So maybe Usyk would be able to close the distance without Fury being able to take, you know, a step back into the side, move laterally, and move the way that he would before to be able to keep Usyk on the outside. I don't know. But that is interesting. That is an interesting matchup. By the way, is everybody here pretty much picking Usyk to beat AJ in the rematch? I just dropped a preview on that one. I did a little bit of an early preview. I had done an early preview like 3 weeks ago, but I just dropped the official preview like yesterday or the day before. Peep that if you haven't had a chance. But yeah, I can't wait for that rematch. It's so intense. Let's see. Yeah, Brendan Jackson said Usyk's really bulked up in his recent training videos. Yeah, I feel like that could cut either way. But again, I'm going to assume that Usyk knows what he's doing with his body. But yeah, we're about to wrap this up, guys. I want to thank you guys once again for coming through and talking some boxing with me. Stan Tucker, happy birthday, Dad. My dad, Stan Tucker, is in the house. Happy birthday. Yeah, it's my fiance's birthday today, and it's my dad's birthday today. Happy birthday. Love you, Dad. And he says, yep, Usyk should win. And it's funny, my dad and I were talking like a couple years ago. It's around the time Usyk was beating like Tony Bellew and Marriaga. And even when he moved up to beat Chaz Witherspoon, we were talking like, how does Usyk fare against like the elite heavyweights? And we were both kind of agreeing, yeah, he probably doesn't do well against AJ. It sounds crazy now, right? But we were like, no, he doesn't beat AJ. He doesn't beat Joshua and Fury and Wilder and those guys. You know, that's what we were thinking, like maybe 2-3, years ago. As much success as he was having in that World Boxing Super Series, beating Maris Briedis, Murat Gassiev, Marco Huck, I think. Yeah, it was like, yeah, he's looking great. But no, he's not going to beat the super heavyweights, basically. The guys who are like 230, 240 and up. No, he's not going to beat those guys. Well, yeah, funny how things change once you see the rubber hit the road. Brendan Jackson said Usyk should drop AJ once or twice and definitely either TKOs or knocks him out in the rematch. Ouch. Damn, that would be tough. Just given like the type of career AJ has had, it would just be really, really tough to see him lose back-to-back fights against this, against this just brilliant boxer. That'd be tough to see. Because AJ just seems like a really nice guy too, doesn't he? He just seems like he's a genuinely like a reasonable, nice guy. So yeah, but that would be tough. That'd be tough. Brendan Jackson said, I remember asking how Usyk would do against the heavies until I watched all of Usyk's fights at the World Boxing Super Series. Oh, no. The World Series of Boxing, right? When he fought Joe Joyce. It was kind of semi-pro, right? They weren't wearing the headgear, but they weren't amateurs, but it doesn't count towards your professional record. Yeah. And he beat Joe Joyce among others. I forgot who those. Yeah, Junior Fa. You're right. Junior Fa was in that too, who got knocked out surprisingly recently. Yeah, you're right, Brendan Jackson. Heck yeah. But yeah, thank you guys once again. Brendan Jackson, thank you. Stan Tucker, a.k.a. Dad, thank you, and happy birthday. Jay Foreman says smart money would goes with Usyk, but I can't lie. I'll be rooting for AJ. Jay Foreman, I like it. Thanks again for coming through. Yeah, Julius Armstrong, thank you for coming through. TJ, heck yeah, thank you for coming through. Sonny Jack Napier, thanks again for coming through. And yeah, it's always appreciated, guys, when you guys let me know when the audio cuts out. Like I'll see the comment come through, I'm like, what? Like what happened? Heck yeah. So again, this coming weekend we've got Teofimo Lopez as the headliner. Teofimo Lopez versus Pedro Campa, and on Friday we've got the return of Tevin Farmer taking on former belt holder at 135, the 39-year-old Mickey Bay. And then next week, we have all kinds of action taking place next week, including Alexander Usyk versus Anthony Joshua too. Yeah, can't wait for that one. Upheaval's in the house. Yeah, what is good? Upheaval 963. Yeah, good to hear from you. Yeah, thank you for coming through. Salute. Yeah, thank you guys. Can't wait to catch up next Tuesday. By the way, I am kind of like I'm thinking about doing an MMA weekly, and I'm also, by the way, next week I'm gonna do a live chat, basically a fight week live chat. It's either gonna be on Wednesday or Thursday. I'll let you know, but I'm gonna do a live chat for Usyk versus AJ2. So we're gonna do a deeper dive on Usyk versus AJ2 next week. It's either going to be Wednesday or Thursday on Fight Week. Yeah, I can't wait to talk with you guys then, hopefully. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Upheaval 963. It's always a pleasure, man. Hope you guys have a great rest of the week. Check out the preview that I just dropped on Teofimo Lopez versus Pedro Campa if you haven't. I'm about to also drop Navarrete, who fights next weekend. I'm about to drop the preview on his fight against Eduardo Baez. That's gonna drop in like 2 to 3 days, something like that. But yeah, thank you as always, and can't wait to talk with you guys soon. I'm Wood. Heck yeah. Thanks for tuning in, guys.